murder's wrong. I believe in all of the Ten Commandments.
Why is murder wrong? The definition of the word is the wrongful killing of another human being.
Ayaan would say it's because of Christianity.
No, it's irrelevant. Soviet Union, these are not atheistic governments.
The account you're giving of atheism is just wrong. It is based on atheism, and we have seen the results.
Stop making it a worldview. It's just, I don't believe in God, full stop, that's it. What do you believe? In civil rights, and women's rights, and gay rights.
Are these rights you speak of in the room with us right now?
Yes, I think I do.
Where are they?
Welcome back to Rattlesnake TV, guys. In this video, we're going to be going through a really interesting recent debate from the Free Press about if the Western world needs a religious revival or not. It's an incredibly interesting and relevant topic, and on the side of yes, we do need a revival, you have Ayaan Hirsi Ali, a former Muslim, now apostate, who then joined the new atheist movement and has more recently converted to Christianity. And you've also got Ross Douthat, who is a supernaturalist, conservative American author and New York Times columnist. And on the other side, you've got Michael Shermer, who is the founder of Skeptic Magazine, and comedian and radio personality Adam Carolla. So very important and interesting topics in this one that are brought up. And so we'll skip the opening statements and get right into the dialogue.
You want people to just do the right thing.
Yes.
I think everyone on this stage and everyone here and any decent person would agree with that. And I think the question is, can you get to the right thing without God? And what Ayaan especially was arguing is that when you take out that foundational layer, the operating system doesn't work. And I want you maybe, Michael, because you really make this case in the moral arc, you argue that you don't need the God piece of it in order to get to whatever you want to call it, the humanitarian, the moral piece. Make that case for us.
Well, perhaps at one point we did need it in the way Adam said, but not anymore. I mean, just if you look at the rights revolutions, civil rights, women's rights, gay rights, and so forth, it's primarily religions that were drug into these revolutions with their teeth in the past and finally came around after the secular arguments were made using rationality and reason based on Enlightenment arguments about being treated equally under the law and no one's a means to an end but an end in themselves. These are classic Enlightenment philosopher arguments that eventually won the day, that took several centuries. And so if you look at how it was done, had we been having this debate, I don't know, a century and a half ago, we would have all said, oh, slavery's great. It says right there in the Old Testament, and here's all the rational arguments that Southern preachers made and so on. And almost nobody who was religious argued that this was a bad idea. Now, the handful of people like Wilberforce and a few Quakers that were abolitionists, their primary opponents were religious people. They were the religious leaders that said, no, you're wrong. But none of us would think like that now. What has happened? Something has happened. We've all had our consciousness raised, our sense of who belongs in the moral sphere has expanded to more and more people where we don't even think about it. And you could just go all the way up to the gay rights revolution. It was 2011. They were still in the minority support for gay rights. And then after, it's probably the fastest revolution in history, by 2015, the Supreme Court said it's the law of the land. That was the end of the story. And it wasn't religion that got us there. It was secular arguments made by activists. And then religious people said, oh yeah, we always thought that was a great idea.
So as these secularists tend to do, and Michael Shermer is one of the most famous anti-religion crusaders there is, but as they tend to do, he is just presupposing that all of these things that he just mentioned, such as the feminist movement or the women's rights movement and the LGBTQ or gay rights movements, are just inherently positive. And whilst you could argue that there are aspects of this that are positive, can we really say that after 100 years of feminist propaganda and women flooding the workforce and higher education, that this has been a positive for not only women, but for society as a whole? And are you really going to argue that the spread of LGBTQ into our culture has been a good thing? I mean, I think that it's good for everybody to have equal rights under the law, but are these societal revolutions really something we can look back on and say, yep, we have a more healthy, prosperous, and united society because of these secular social revolutions?
You're watching a documentary that captures the first gay liberation march in New York City on June 28, 1970.
And I've just rejected the mold, and when I rejected the mold, I was happier.
I would say that's a hard sell. But what I would say that he is right about is that it was not religious ideas that begot these sort of social revolutions and this mass-scale social change. It was secular movements and secular ideas from the 20th and 21st century. And one thing that I think that we can deduce from these movements, if we look at them critically, is that mass-scale social change without a very firm eye on the foundation and the structure of what actually built your society will just result in chaos. Moreover, whilst they were secular movements, the idea of human rights themselves, that was not secular in its origin, and that is about to be highlighted. Before we get there, guys, don't forget to please smash that like button. It does help me out enormously. And if you would like to subscribe to the channel, then you are more than welcome to do so. Let's get into it.
You guys want to respond to that? Ross?
I mean, I don't want to dispute that people can lead upright lives in which they attempt to do the right thing without belief in God. Obviously, such people exist. I don't dispute that societies can exist at certain moments in time. You know, Scandinavia for 25 years or so, for instance, that seem to do pretty well under secular conditions. But first, I think Michael's account of American and Western history is deeply flawed. I think it's pretty obvious where, most of the arguments, most of the most powerful and successful arguments against slavery came from. And I think there's a reason that if you do a through line in the history of abolitionism down through civil rights, and you hit Wilberforce, you hit Lincoln's second inaugural address, and you get all the way to Martin Luther King's letter from Birmingham jail and the I Have a Dream speech, it's really, really hard to imagine those kind of arguments having the same force absent the deep religious foundation that they obviously had. And yes, the Civil War was effectively a religious civil war between two competing interpretations of Scripture. That's absolutely true. And there's no question that every religious body has arguments and internal struggles, and it's not like becoming religious automatically gives you immediate access to, the fullness of moral truth. But everything that Ayaan said about the actual history of America and the role that Christianity has played in America is true and correct, and is just sort of, it is part of our common heritage. And the larger points that Michael was making, the resolved, there are layers here, right? And I'm a Christian, so obviously, I'm with Ayaan about the particulars of Christianity. But the resolution is about religion, right? And so Michael spent a lot of time saying, oh, people say Christianity is so great, but look at all these amazing civilizations around the world. I hesitate to inform you that all of those civilizations were themselves religious, right? And the experiment in founding a civilization on a disbelief in the distinctiveness of human beings, the absence of a metaphysical horizon for human life, and the absence of a moral law that exists independently of our own consciousness, which, by the way, materialism basically has to deny the existence of entirely as a reality as opposed to just an epiphenomenon. That record just isn't very impressive, and I don't think if you look at the condition of Western Europe or the most secularized parts of the world today, that the prognosis for the next 50 to 100 years is all that impressive. So I will concede, yes, for particular moments, things can go okay without belief in God. But I think the broader portrait of human history and the broader reality suggests that those periods are likely to be evanescent. And I think the one we're living through now is likely to be remembered that way.
So very articulate there by Ross. I always do enjoy somebody who can turn a good phrase like this. But he's completely right, and I totally agree with this point. The point being, and it's a point that the most outspoken critics of secularism tend to use, is that the foundation of our societies were built on religious values, and specifically in the Western world, Christianity. Jordan Peterson is obviously one of the most famous proponents of this, and this was the sentiment that was echoed at the recent ARC conference that I attended, which obviously Jordan Peterson put together. What the secularists will do is they will take all of the principles and the ideas from Christianity and they will apply them, but they will just do it without the God part, or they will completely just undermine the source. And there really is no way around this for them. You can't in good faith argue that the world pre-Christianity was one that adhered to principles like loving your neighbor as yourself, the value of human dignity, sexual morality, compassion and charity, the sanctity of life, and the list goes on. And recently, I've been looking into the work of Tom Holland a lot, who brilliantly highlights this and the impact that Christianity has on the world, and it's something that's actually really changed his mind.
To nominate for me one thing, just one thing, that Christianity has introduced that doesn't have some source, some parallel, some analogy in previous and in other civilizations.
The ideal of lifelong matrimony, I think that's a very distinctive Christian concept. The category of what by the 19th century is coming to be categorized as homosexuality and heterosexuality. I think they have no precedence. I think the notion of secularism, the idea of there being religions, I think all these are entirely exclusive to Christian civilization. I think the concept of science as it emerges in the 19th century, I think is entirely exclusive to Christian civilization. I think the idea that human beings are created in the image of God, that is obviously something that Christians share with Jews. It gives a degree of dignity to human beings that no other cultural tradition that I'm aware of even remotely approximates to.
So all this to say that secularists will take the ideas of Christianity and they will see these ideas are great, but they will not attribute them to the actual source. And instead, what they'll do is they'll appropriate the ideas and then actually mock the source and reject the source completely. But what we're actually seeing, and you guys might be seeing this, let me know in the comments if you disagree or if you've seen this in your own personal life or in your community or with the people around you, is that people are rejecting this, and this notion is actually crumbling because people are getting clued into the fact that secularists do not have a basis for and therefore cannot provide a justification for any of these ideas. Ideas that they love to espouse about human flourishing and about human dignity and about thriving, etc. And this idea about foundations for beliefs is about to come into question.
To be remembered that way.
I think one of the strongest arguments on this side of the divide is look around, right? When we became unmoored from religion, other things filled the God-shaped hole. And Adam, you know, you're one of the most sort of outspoken, charismatic voices on the subject of people having absolutely fucking lost their minds, excuse my French. Do you not see, how do you explain what that's about? How do you explain the sort of obsession with politics? I mean, I was interviewing Alex Karp last night, and he talks about wokeness as a kind of pagan religion. What do you make of, how do you contend with that argument?
Well, many thoughts. So one is, you know, we talk about religion historically, and we talk about all the greats and how that was woven into many famous speeches and, you know, World War II and Lincoln and so on and so forth. I think it's a tougher sell now that we have iPhones and technology to sort of sell the concept of religion to more technically advanced people. You know, I mean, I think it's an easier global sell to a group that is a little more primitive and not sure why that fiery orb in the sun, in the sky burns so bright. You know, now that we're going to the moon and thinking about going to Mars, I just feel like it's a tougher sell. Now, I do agree that somebody said, you know, once you don't believe in religion, you don't believe in nothing, you believe in something, and that's where the woke left sort of comes in with their tribalism and their sort of pagan, sort of ritualistic stuff, which has a lot of notes of religion to it. So I in no way want to come out here and defend some sort of morphed form of religion which turned into left-wing wokeism, because I certainly don't want that. What my vision is with religion is sort of my vision with government. I want a small government. You know, I'd like government to be as small as it can be. I want people to have dominion over their own decisions, and I want to train them to make the right decisions, not through the threat of government or religion, but out of a kind of a moral homeostasis that you just, murder's wrong. I believe in all of the Ten Commandments.
Why is murder wrong?
Well, because now we're starting to, if you want to distill it down, I think anything you don't want, anything you do not wish for yourself to perpetrate on somebody else is morally and sort of cosmically wrong, minus the religion aspect of it. And I'll say this, it works this way with pets. You know what I mean? If you put a bowl out for one cat and a bowl out for another cat, and you just remove the other bowl and say yours is gone, the one cat may be upset, but it's not wise, it's wrong. I think it's baked into nature.
What happens though, let's say you have a stroke and you're lying on the floor and your cat hasn't been fed in a long time. What is your cat, because obviously you can construct intellectual systems.
Let's not get into this Gene Hackman business, by the way. If this is where you're going, I saw Poseidon Adventure. I'm a huge fan, and if this is where you're going, Ross.
My only point is that I think it is obviously you can construct sort of, cultural forms that make a case against murder. I think the claim that you can find a prohibition on murder in the cosmos or the natural world is a bit harder to justify, but.
Well, I shouldn't say in the cosmos, because that sounds a little out there. I would say.
I think it's
if you live, if it's a sort of what would you wish for yourself and what wouldn't you wish for yourself, transcends just the human existence. It bleeds into all of God's creatures.
So basically it's wrong because it's wrong is what Adam's justification here is. And I love Adam Carolla. I think he's a fantastic comedian, super funny guy. He was really funny throughout this entire debate. However, when it comes to this debate about presuppositionalism and about philosophy, I think it would be super interesting for him to get an expert on this matter on his show and maybe just have this discussion for a few hours and see if he can have his mind changed. Because right now his logic is essentially it's wrong because it's wrong, or it's wrong because if I wouldn't want it done to me, then it would have to be wrong. Well, there are many cultures around the world that have various different cultural customs and practices that we would find heinous and we would find abhorrent and we would never want to do over here. We would definitely find it immoral if there was female genital mutilation or ritual sacrifice of human beings or child marriage. Even things like caste systems and discrimination and polygamy, etc. The list goes on and on and on. How can we actually argue that these things are foundationally wrong if it's just based on our own preferences? And also, when you say terms like it's just cosmically wrong, I know he corrected himself, but it was still the same sort of idea. You're implying that there is some sort of intelligibility to the world, that the world is cosmically ordered somehow. And if you are implying some sort of cosmic right and wrong or cosmic good and evil, it doesn't exactly sound like the product of billions of years of cosmic flux from a big bang that created a random accidental population of accidental creatures who are destined to perish in a heat death. So on to the next part now, where Ayaan Hirsi shows just how based she has become.
What?
To quote?
I think one of the big aspects of this conversation is the question about religion being utilitarian, right? So Adam, when you're talking about the gangbangers that found Jesus, and thank God they did because now they're not going to murder you, it's making a kind of, religion is good as a tool. And Ayaan, the reason you're on this stage is because last year you wrote a very, very widely read essay, which I imagine is going to become a book, about your conversion to Christianity. And I think it created an enormous cultural conversation. And I think the most kind of acerbic critics, what they had to say about it was, it wasn't a sincere conversion because the reason for the conversion was a utilitarian one. It was basically, Christianity is a good program, not Christianity is true. And I kind of wanted to throw that out here as part of the conversation because, Ross, in your new book, You argue not just that it's a good program, but that it matters and is effective because it's true. So let's maybe talk a little bit about that, because to me that's sort of at the heart of this. I think there's a lot of people in the audience who would agree, yeah, we would have been better off had we not discovered atheism, but we did. And so how do we like put that back in the bottle? I'm saying a lot of things, so feel free to jump in. Or we can go back to Gene Hackman, but yeah.
Yeah, so I think both things are true. I became a Christian because I believe that Christianity is true, but I think the proposition that it is, I wouldn't want to use the word utilitarian, but Christian morality is superior to any other kind of morality I've seen. I lived as a Muslim and I lived as an atheist, and I settled on Christianity. And I settled on Christianity because it fulfills a personal spiritual need. I confess I did have a God-shaped hole, and it's gone now. It's filled. So that is the personal story aside. Now, atheism has always existed because it's always been, a perception of the world, nature, the naturalists, people just, the people who don't perceive of God, don't need a God figure, aren't spiritual. We didn't call them atheists. We probably call them naturalists. We had other labels for them, but they always existed. But for this particular discussion, I always want to separate the atheists that I found in the West, nice, wonderful, warm, friendly people, but they
Some of them, I'm sure, are good
them,
people.
Yeah. But they are Christian atheists. You know, everything that Adam said, I just wanted to say, but that's all Christianity. You just set aside, and you grew up with it. And so there's that. There are atheists like Adam and Michael. And then there are hardcore atheists. For instance, the communist atheists. And if you ask yourself the question, is there any society that has adopted atheism as its governing creed? And where can we find them? And I think of places like North Korea. I think of Cuba. I think of the former Soviet Union. I think of China. And I know that the two atheists here on the stage and the atheists that I used to be are very different. But I think what most Westerners forget is that they are products of a Western Christian moral system.
So we're like, you're saying that Adam and Michael are sort of enjoying the fumes of Christianity, even if they can't acknowledge it.
They are non-practicing Christians, yes.
I believe they're non-practicing Jews, but I don't know.
And Jews.
Okay, I completely agree with Ayaan Hirsi there. And her story is such an interesting one because, like we said before, she is an apostate in terms of how Muslims would see her because she left the Islamic faith. And then she joined the New Atheist movement, and she was actually a very prominent figure in this. And we've seen over the last maybe 5 years or so, and even before that perhaps, that these ideas have really started to crumble. And people are looking around, and these once exalted figures like Richard Dawkins and Sam Harris, etc., people are starting to think that perhaps the emperor wears no clothes, because the product and the result of these new atheist movements has led to so much despair and so much chaos. And there's definitely, as far as I can see, a movement happening in the Western world where people are asking much deeper questions. And people are just sort of rejecting the notion that we are this cosmic accident and that we are just sort of skin and goo, or that we are stardust, or however you want to say it. And I actually think that Ayaan Hirsi is extremely brave for doing this conversion, because people like Richard Dawkins are really not happy with her about this, and it would have really taken some chutzpah to do that. And not only does she do that, she doesn't dance around it or try and obfuscate the central claims of Christianity at all. She's right to the point, and she says, it's true, and you are wrong, etc. And I just find that really cool, because a lot of the time when people convert to Christianity, or when these public intellectuals will talk about Christianity, they'll try and really appeal to secularists, and they'll try and appeal to the modern view of things, because perhaps they don't want to be seen as crazy or they don't want to lose too much face. But Ayaan Hirsi Ali is just based and right to the point, and you've got to love that.
The account you're giving of atheism is just wrong.
And her speech at the ARC conference was very similar. She didn't mince words, so it's a really fascinating story, and I'm enjoying watching it. And I listen to a lot of the things that Ayaan Hirsi Ali does these days, and she's very emblematic of this rejection of materialism and this rejection of secularism that is happening in our culture. So anyways, back to the clips now. In this next part, once again, they get into the presuppositional argument a little bit.
Yeah, Ross, go
Does
ahead.
Michael want to say
Michael, go
something
ahead.
Well,
before
so
I...
You guys are being way too polite. Yeah, please go ahead.
Well, we talk kind of fast.
Well, just a couple of points. So, why is murder wrong? The definition of the word is the wrongful killing of another human being. So essentially you're asking, why is it wrong to be wrong? It's in the definition of the word. What you mean is why is it wrong to kill other people? It's not always wrong to kill other people. Self-defense is a legitimate form of killing somebody else. Killing in a just war is justified. Capital punishment, I happen to be against that, but a lot of people think it's okay. So what we're really talking about is the, taking of somebody else's life when they have no autonomous control over their bodies and they don't want to die, something like that. So our principle is autonomous choice over your life decisions, including to live. And that would include abortion rights or reproductive rights, slavery and freedom, and so on. For 2.5, 3 centuries, we've been basically arguing this is where our moral foundation is. We begin with the autonomous decision of the individual. The individual is the target of our moral concern. And do they have more choice or less choice? Would you rather live in North Korea or South Korea? Would you rather live in East Germany or West Germany before this? Of course, everybody knows why. Okay, second point. It's not.
But Ayaan would say it's because of Christianity.
No, it's irrelevant. These are orthogonal. North Korea, Soviet Union. So these are not atheistic governments. Atheism is orthogonal to this. These are communist governments. Atheism isn't a thing. It's nothing. Stop making it a worldview. It's just, I don't believe in God, full stop, that's it. What do you believe? In civil rights, in women's rights, in gay rights. I believe in equal treatment under the law. These are positive assertions.
Are these rights you speak of in the room with us right now?
Yes, I think I do.
Where are they?
I do. I argue for natural rights in the sense that, yeah.
But where do they exist? In what form?
Because we decide to make them. Yeah.
Who decides?
We do.
What are we?
We in our constitutions.
No, I mean you and I. Like, what are we? When you've issued a long defense of the reasoning individual making free choices. But yeah. I've read a lot of atheist materialist writers, including some brilliant scientific minds who are serious atheist materialists. And their argument really strongly implies that at the bottom, the thing that you call Michael Shermer is essentially a theatrical illusion imposed upon a set of chemical reactions in your brain. So if that's the case...
Yeah, but that's not my argument.
Okay.
So, yeah, Dawkins isn't here.
That's fair.
And I make the argument that, in fact, we are moral agents. And we are born with, inherit from our ancestors, all the way back to primates, a sense of right and wrong and guilt and shame when we harm others. Why? Because we live as social beings and we have to have some sort of interaction. And if I harm you in some way or threaten to harm you, then it pays for you to respond in some way. And it pays for our group to have a set of rules by which we're going to punish people who don't play nice and so on. And then we inculcate that into our thinking. And this is what's taken so long over the centuries. But again, centuries ago, no one would have given any thought to the kinds of things, or they would have given a lot of thought to the kinds of things that never even enter our imaginations. How should you treat women or Jews or blacks or whatever? Our moral sphere is expanded to include those as honorary members of our in-group. And that in-group has gotten much larger. How did that happen? I'm arguing not religion. It's these kind of arguments from rationality based on these Enlightenment ideas of equal treatment, the principle of interchangeable perspectives, bodily autonomy, and so on. And we've just slowly, maybe by decade levels have changed. You can hardly see it. But if you look back at novels from the 1950s and the way they talk about Jews and women and blacks, it's embarrassing. No novelist would write like that. Well, maybe some would, but most wouldn't. And why is that? Because we Had our consciousness raised through television scripts and films and novels and books and everything. We've all changed. And I'm arguing it's not religious pulling us in that direction. Religion's being pulled by these forces.
So once again, guys, it's wrong because it's wrong. It's wrong because the definition says it's wrong. And who says that it's wrong? Who made the definition? Well, we did. And Ross actually perfectly highlighted there that Michael Shermer's view completely contradicts itself. Michael Shermer has honestly the audacity to try and argue for natural rights. Once again, trying to imply that there is order and structure and intelligibility to this cosmic accident that we call the universe. He said he wants gay rights and women's rights, etc. But why do you argue for that? It's just completely arbitrary according to your worldview. And also, as Ross said, what are these rights you speak of? Can we touch them? Or are they just things we made up, making them actually illusory?
But where do they exist? In what form?
Because we decide to make them.
Furthermore, if they come and take away women's rights like they've done in Afghanistan, for example, then how can you say that's wrong? Because according to them, it makes society more cohesive. But the way that Ross actually points out the contradiction in Michael Shermer's worldview here is that he notes that all of the most famous atheist scholars and authors always resign to nihilism. At the very bottom, it always comes down to nihilism. As Richard Dawkins says, there is no good and evil, no right and wrong. At the bottom, it is just blind, pitiless indifference. And the reason why Richard Dawkins argues this after a lifetime of scholarly work is because he simply can't escape it. And if this is the case, and Michael Shermer does actually have to bite this bullet, then you are in no position to argue for any sort of natural or objective morality. And whatever they've done there in Afghanistan, you actually can't make a case for why it is wrong outside of your own preferences. And I just think it's wrong because it's wrong, I guess. And then he makes the case that atheism and communism are not synonymous. Atheism and communism are orthogonal. Now, I'm not going to sit here and act like I know what orthogonal means. So I'm going to let Ayaan Hirsi give a response.
I think it's quite wrong. I think the account you're giving of atheism is just wrong, because the leaders of the Soviet Union explicitly banned religion and based it on atheism. And so does China to this day. They persecute any believers in any faith, and the same in Northern Korea. So I think the proposition that there is no society that is based on actual atheism, I think that proposition is wrong. It is based on atheism, and we have seen the results. And I've already made the case, but I think it bears repeating to say, all of these things that you talk about, such as slavery and segregation and the oppression of women's rights, all of these were argued. And here I think it's important to make it clear that it was done in the realms of Christianity using biblical arguments to make, we are created in the image of God, the dignity of human beings, and that is why you don't find slavery was a universal practice in history and still goes on in other countries. And you look at the story of the abolition of slavery, and it's done first in the West, and it's the West then that exported it to other countries. And I think that if we're going to have a debate on this, then at least we should agree on the factual account of.
Let me just take up Barry's question about the deep truth issue here and try and connect it to Ayaan's argument, right? I think you can see the conflict between atheism and theism as fundamentally a conflict about what is the primary fact in the universe, mind or matter, right? Does mind come first or does matter come first? If mind comes first, you don't have to be a Christian, but you do have to be some sort of theist, or at the very least, some kind of pantheist. If you say matter comes first, then you're going to have a very hard time explaining why minds are actually meaningful agents in the world with the kind of rights and dignity and capacities that are ascribed to them by our debating partners. The points I made very briefly in my opening remarks were to suggest I think we have a lot of data from science, philosophy, and human experience, especially over the last 200 years, under conditions of increasing secularism, to make the case that mind has a primary role in the universe. This helps explain why the universe at this the highest level seems designed with human beings in mind. It explains why we, coming up from below in our consciousness, are capable of doing the things that Adam was talking about. How do you build the iPhone? How do you go to Mars or the moon if you don't have confidence that the universe is regular and consistent and mathematically beautiful and made for us to discover? These two things connect, and they also help explain the resilience and persistence of religious experience, which I, as a weirdo supernaturalist, think is an underrated argument for the truths of religion. So where does that get you? Again, it doesn't get you to dogmatic truths of any particular faith, but it gets you to the point where Ayaan comes in and says, okay, if there probably is a God, then it's reasonable to look around the world. You know, there's a bunch of big religious traditions. It's entirely reasonable to say, okay, out of that range of religious traditions, I will throw in my lot with the one that seems to have played a nurturing role in the civilization that I love and that I value and cherish. That's not a mistake that somehow contradicts the deeper claims of religion. That's a rational response to a reality that should impel all of us towards some kind of religious belief. And I will just say again, I think the perspectives of our debating partners, the admirable moralism that they display, itself depends not per se on any specific religious teaching, but on a broader perspective on what human beings are that only makes sense if you assert that mind is primary. Consciousness is actually the primary thing in the universe, and actually everyone in this room knows it because that is your immediate experience right now. Every single person in this room listening to me talk is having a supernatural experience, whether you realize it or not.
Explain that. Because somehow, Ross, you have not mentioned the word God in that entire beautiful soliloquy.
Because God is the appropriate name to give to the primary, no, not to that experience, no, to the primary form of mind and consciousness that we should reasonably hold responsible for our entire existence and for our personal existences. This is what does being made in the image of God mean? It means fundamentally that your consciousness, in a more limited way, participates in the same rational and creative power that set the whole universe in motion. What do I mean by supernatural? The claim that you exist and that you, as a self-identifying conscious agent, have power to make your hands move, to make decisions in the world, is already a supernatural claim, which is why when you push down through atheism, through materialism, you get to like Robert Sapolsky and people denying that free will even exists, right? But we know free will exists. We do.
You have no choice.
Adam?
So really interesting there. I hadn't heard of Ross, but my man, like I said, can really turn a phrase, and I can appreciate that. These days, seeing people who have a really good grasp on the spoken word and a really good grasp on the English language is fewer and further between, clearly. I think that's what we call a self-own on the internet there. But anyways, guys, really interested to read your thoughts. If you completely disagree with me and think I'm a total idiot, then let me know in the comments below. If you have arguments against what I've said, I always read these comments and I'm very interested to know, because if I'm wrong, then I like to just put my hands up. But I think it's pretty rock solid. But if you've got any feedback, then please let me know below. So guys, if you enjoyed that, don't forget to smash that like button. If you are kind enough to do so, subscribe to the channel. And if you'd like to watch another one, right here. Till next time, I'm Jake. This is RattlesnakeTV, keeping you armed and dangerous.